Camp 207, Siberia. The cold was a living thing there. It bit through the skin and into the bone. Every breath burned like glass. We were told to dig foundations for new barracks, but the earth we struck was not earth at all. It was frozen history, layer upon layer of things the snow was supposed to hide. At first, it was bones, long bones, yellow with age, still wrapped in rusted chains. We tried to pretend they were animal, but animals do not wear shackles. Sometimes we found scraps of uniforms, buttons, boots with feet still inside. Someone whispered that this camp had been built over another one. The guards laughed. They said to keep digging. By the second night, no one was laughing. The frost made our shovels ring like bells. Sparks jumped when the steel struck ice. The air was too still, too heavy, like the ground was holding its breath. Then we found a skull that still had hair frozen to it. I dropped my shovel and couldn't pick it up again for a long time. On the third night, the wind died completely. You could hear your own heartbeat. We were still digging when something pale moved in the pit. A hand stiff, white, with skin like ice reached up and caught the edge of my shovel. I pulled. It didn't let go. Another hand grabbed my ankle. The cold went through the fabric, through the skin, straight into the bone. Someone screamed. Then we all did. The ground began to whisper. Not the wind, not even sound. It was like the ice itself was speaking, voices seeping through the cracks, dozens of them, maybe hundreds. They knew our names. They spoke them softly, like old friends greeting each other after a long separation. Dig with us, they said. I don't know how long it lasted. The guards fired their rifles into the pit, but the echoes sounded wrong, like the shots were swallowed before they could reach the air. When morning came, the pit was filled again. Not with soil, with men. The same men who had been digging beside me. Their faces were calm, eyes open, staring at the gray sky. Their hands still clutched the shovels. They looked like they had just kept working through the night. The guard said nothing. They told us to move the camp farther east, where the ground was softer. No one argued. That was years ago. Decades, maybe. Time doesn't work the same way here. But every October, when the cold starts to return, I hear it again. The scrape of metal under the ice, slow and steady, like a heartbeat. If I listen closely, I can hear them calling. My name. Their voices are patient now. They've had plenty of time to wait. I know that one day, when the frost is deep enough and the ground starts to crack again, I'll go back to the pit. I'll take a shovel, and this time I won't stop. Dig with us, they'll say, and I will. You want me to start exactly like that? Fine. I could do that because I was there, because I still smell the blued metal in my teeth and hear the clink that is not a clink, the one that means bone against blade. Because the camp wasn't a place, not really, more like a habit the earth picked up after too many winters. You keep doing a thing long enough and it keeps doing you back. The first thing we lost wasn't a man, it was sound. You learn to judge trouble by noise in a place like that. The drunk tenor of a guard, the cough you pretend isn't blood, the sing-song measure of the work bell. After that third night, the world went hushed and stuck like wool jammed into your ears, and we all learned to communicate with glances and with steam from our mouths. The cook, big, red, cheerful because he had to be, burned his hands pulling a kettle off the stove and didn't cry out. He just bent over and breathed through his nose and looked at me across the mess hall like I had the other half of a sentence he'd been trying to say his whole life. I kept my head down. I held my tin bowl like it mattered. I ate the same gray paste I would later learn to dream of. I watched a fly that had somehow survived the cold walk slow circles on the window, rest, then go again leg by leg by leg. I swear the fly looked at the snow and wanted back in. We packed up the next day. Moving camp felt like cleaning a wound you knew would keep opening. The guards, sure of themselves in that practiced way, made their lists and read their lists and shoved anyone not moving fast enough. The trucks chunked and coughed into reluctant life. The sick, the ones with frost-gnawed ears and clotted lungs, were told to lie still by the nurse. She didn't have a name we were allowed to use, so we called her Tata, Auntie, because she rasped at us like a relative. She had hands like wire and a habit of counting our ribs with 2 fingers while she pretended to wrap gauze. "Camp to 7 moves," said the dispatcher in his hat with a crumpled brim, scribbling, stamping, hot breath making a cloud. "All of you move." We moved, but you can't move a pit. You can't pick up what lives under ice and relocate it like a stove or a bunk bed. We left, and the whispering didn't come with us. It stayed. That's something I need you to understand. The voices aren't wandering ghosts. They're a place, a specific coordinate where the ground learned the taste of man. East meant the same snow, different trees. A stand of larches that kept their needles inside when the trucks passed. A creek that was ice on top, but moving down in the dark, chuckling like it knew better jokes than us. The guards had diagrams and orders. We unfolded canvas. We banged together a barack with crooked nails. A radio was erected in its little temple of plywood and tar. The radio operator flicked a switch and static rose like bees. He smiled like a priest. Everyone took courage from the radio, like it could import warmer weather or laws we recognized. You asked for a voice. I'll give you mine, clean as I can. I wasn't a criminal. I was a clerk who miscounted sacks of flour on the wrong day for the wrong man. A thief of numbers, they said. You stole bread by writing it a different size. I learned to carry guilt like a hot stone curled inside my mitten, shifting hand to hand so I didn't blister in one spot too much. Guilt keeps you alive, and it also kneels on your chest while you sleep. Some nights, I could feel it changing shape under my ribs, like an unborn thing kicking. First rule we learned after the move. Don't speak your name into the wind after dark, even when the wind is weak. Especially then. The guards didn't write this rule down, but they obeyed it. We all did. Men being men, someone breaks the rule to prove rules are breakable. There was a boy with a fox-red beard, a neat little chin triangle of hair he groomed with a bit of lard. He said his own name into the blue edge of evening like a dare. He grinned at me and shrugged. A minute later, he wasn't smiling. He was looking at his boots with that unfocused stare I recognize now. We all had it sometimes, the standing dream. He lifted his head like a dog catching a distant whistle and walked out past the latrines toward the creek. We were too tired to shout. The nurse saw him and spat. The dispatcher opened his mouth, then closed it again. A guard took one stiff step after the boy and stopped because his boot leather sang on the crusted snow. Sang, I tell you, like scraped glass. Music of the wrong kind. The boy reached the creek and kept going. We found him the next day, just barely under the glaze, his fingers scissored around a smooth stone like he'd forgotten to choose between swimming and holding on. The second rule, never let your breath fall in sync with the shovel. The tempo matters. If you match it exactly, suck in as you heave, let go as it bites, the ground can listen. It finds the rhythm of your lungs and memorizes it. I know how it sounds. This is me, a rational man who used to count sacks in a warm storeroom and argue about shipments, telling you not to breathe in time. But habits become prayers, and prayers become laws when enough men do them and live. I hummed off time in my throat and thought about my mother's boiling kettle, how it never whistled because she'd broken the mouth and just let it rattle and sigh. I had a bunk near the middle of the barack by a stove that never stopped pretending to be hot. The new barack smelled of sap and rat shit, and the last camp we tried to forget. A man across from me, Mikhail, a teacher from Arkhangelsk who wrote letters to his dead wife as if they could be mailed, snored like a bear and clutched an imaginary pencil in his sleep. He taught me how to fix a wobbly table with folded paper and also how to keep blood flowing to fingers by pinching the web between thumb and index finger so hard it hurt. Little magic. I bought him a favor with the nurse once, 2 extra tablespoons of whatever they said was gruel, by making a passable copy of the guard roster from memory. The guard named Sasha who cheated at cards slapped the list out of my hand and called me Worm. He didn't like me much. He had a scar like someone had underlined his eye. The ground east of the pit looked ordinary. That was the worst part. It didn't glow. It didn't exhale. It just waited. The first week passed with only the usual injuries, split palms, chipped teeth from shivering too hard and biting your tongue, a frostbite trick where your fingers go white and then cheerful pink, and you pretend that pink means safe. It doesn't. Pink is a lie before black. On the 8th night, I woke to a sound like wet paper ripping. Everyone else kept sleeping. The sound went on for too long to be just a dream, then stopped so abruptly I thought I'd gone deaf. I propped myself up on my elbows in the stove side, and the nurse farted in her sleep, because even in hell there's comedy. I lay back down. I told myself to count sacks of flour. When I reached 30, I had to start over because the numbers were wrong, and I felt the first tickle of panic under my ribs. I whispered my mother's name without air, just the shape of it in my mouth. Not my name, hers. I slept. Dig with us, the ice had said, but they didn't say where and they didn't say when. That's the slow poison, the waiting. The first time, when the ground took them in, it had been greedy and loud. Now it was sly. It let us think we'd walked away. You want pace, you said, not a lecture. Good. Keep up. We went back to work because that is what men do when fear is useless. We stood 6 feet apart because the guard with the underlined, I decided 6 was the magic number to keep us from huddling. 6 feet is not a defense against anything except warmth. The frost came heavy. Steel blisters rose on the shovel handles. The radio hissed and sometimes coughed out a city name that made us look up and taste home for half a second. Perm, Tomsk, Arkhangelsk. The names were coins we kept under our tongues to spend later on some imagined ticket out. On the 12th day at the news site, a foreman I didn't know well, pale, mole on his left cheek like a misplaced nipple, decided we'd test the ground by dropping a weighted pike. He brought a reel of rope and a length of iron we used to pack ice blocks. He tied a knot like a sailor and looked pleased with himself, which was rare enough to be a warning. He climbed a ladder the carpenters had rigged and let the weight go. It hit the ground like a door shutting in another room of the house. Everyone flinched. The rope twitched once, twice. Then the weight punched through as if someone had opened a throat under the snow. The rope ran fast, too fast, the wheel screaming, gloves burning on the rim as men tried to slow it. The iron rod fell for a long time. I felt the pull in my stomach the way you do when an elevator drops. The foreman tried to break the reel with his heel, and his heel came away bleeding and smoking with the friction. The rope snapped at the knot, and the last 10 feet hissed back through the wheel and slapped him in the teeth. He swallowed the blood, and we all stood listening like that would help. Nothing came back up. We filled that little hole. We filled it with curse words and spit and snow shoveled from a place where the wind had left it soft. The dispatcher wrote something down and pretended it was the same as action. The nurse pinched me between the thumb and forefinger and counted ribs because I'd volunteered to haul the ladder back and bang my shin. She said, "You have 9 good fingers and 1 you keep lying to." I flexed my right pinky and winced. She nodded like that proved some point I'd missed. Sasha with the underline started carrying a small bell on a string. It was a joke at first. He rang it when someone slacked, when someone stood too long giving names to their blisters, when the cook served potato peels pretending they were soup. He rang it like a priest rings a sanctus bell and called us his congregation. Then he hung it on a peg by the barak door and told us to ring it if we needed the latrine at night, so the wolves know to make room. He grinned. I want to step on his throat until his grin stopped being a grin and started being the brief shape a mouth makes after you blow out a candle. We learned a few things that winter about what the ground wants. It does not want your running. It wants your stillness. Men who froze on watch, the ones with too much pride to admit their boots were wet, were always found with their eyes open, looking like they were politely listening. The ground doesn't like drunks. Vodka keeps the blood up and the noise messy, and the messy ones it leaves for later. It likes the men who make bargains inside. Just one more post to set, one more line to pull straight, one more haul. It likes the men who never get to the part where they ask themselves why. That's who I was. Tell the truth, I was good at work I believed I didn't deserve. I made myself valuable so I would be valued. It's a stupid math, and I knew it, and still I did it until my lungs hurt and my hands woke me up at night because they weren't done gripping. I think the ground listened to that, too. It learns the measure of a man by the things he hates about himself and the things he loves. There was a little boy who didn't belong there, a guard's nephew or cousin. Visiting like Siberia was an unfriendly aunt you stop by to keep up appearances. He had a toy truck with a missing wheel. He would push it across the mess hall bench while his uncle played cards and stole cigarettes from the men who still had some. The boy's eyelashes were white with frost, and his nose ran all the time, but he smiled like he'd invented warmth and was bad at sharing. He liked the bell by the door. He rang it in little bursts, ding, 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 and the cook said, "You'll call the damn kid," and the boy laughed and rang it harder. His uncle slapped his hand, and the boy went quiet. He rested his forehead against the doorpost, and it left a wet circle where his skin melted the rime. I can see that circle now when I shut my eyes. The exact size of his coin-sized head heat. The boy was there the night the second thing happened. We weren't digging that evening. We were making stove bricks out of mud, so thin it was almost a memory of mud. We pressed it into wooden frames and slid them near the stove and pretended they would harden into anything other than regret. The radio whispered a woman saying street names and then went back to bees. Sasha half dozed by the door with the bell rope around his wrist like a leash. The nurse was darning socks using the light of a cigarette. A rumor had run through the camp that morning like a bright fish. Transfer list coming, names of men who'd serve enough. I translated enough in my head into not today and tried to swallow it. The boy had drawn a skull in the frost on the window, and his uncle didn't stop him. It began with a smell. Not rot. Not even the sweet iron of blood. Think of a cellar where fruit was stored, the first hint of ferment under the wood. The suggestion that something once alive has found a second job. Men lifted their heads like dogs. The guard with the underline opened one eye and shut it again because bosses hate to be surprised by anything that isn't their own authority. The radiator clanked even though we had no radiators. It clanked in the memory of heat. Then the bell chimed once. Not frantic, a clean, single note. It wasn't the boy. He'd fallen asleep with his head on the table, his cheek pressed to the truck and his white lashes twitching. The bell swung without a hand on it. Sasha's wrist strap tightened and bit him, and he jackknifed it to his feet, sucking spit and swearing. The rope wasn't moving. The bell was. It had frost on it, and the frost shook off in a crystal halo and made a circle on the floorboards. And then the door pushed inward slow enough to be polite. A draft we didn't have because the door fit bad and we'd stuffed rags into the cracks, breathed across our ankles. The radio went silent like a floorboard you step over on purpose. I stood. I think I stood. My knees remembered standing. The rest of me felt both far away and too close. The bell rang again. Somewhere outside, at a distance you couldn't measure, shovels scraped once. We didn't open that door. I'm not that stupid. I'm telling you this because men like to decorate their memories with courage we didn't have. We sat and watched our breath and listened for the scrape. It didn't come again. That single cleaving sound was enough to cut the barack into before and after. Sasha unwound the rope from his wrist with fingers that didn't want to listen, rubbed the skin, then hung the bell back very carefully like it had become a thing you apologized to. The boy woke and said, "Is it morning?" His uncle said, "Yes, even though it was night." He said it the way you lie to a child who won't remember, though we all remember being lied to like that. It scorches something tender and small. Nothing else happened that night. I wanted something too. A knock, a howl, a bursting in, something I could point at and say there. The ground isn't like that. The ground is patient and loves the slow violences. It comes to you in portions. It lets you keep your books. It likes when you log your undoing in neat columns. We kept working east. We kept the rules. We avoided songs with steady rhythms, and the men who could only sing steady were told to hum or chew snow. We pissed in the same trench until the trench found us too warm, then we pissed in another. The nurse stitched a man's ear back on and told him it would die like a leaf, but look fine if he didn't touch it. He touched it. The ear went hard and colorless and sat on his head like a mistake. A month later, a transport came from the west and unloaded a handful of men who smelled like fires we didn't get to have. One of them had a tattoo on his neck, an anchor with a woman's face. The woman had her eyes closed like this was all beneath her. He sought me out the second day and said, "You count?" I said, "What?" He laughed and mimed writing. I nodded. He said, "Good. We'll need counting." He introduced himself as Yuri, which is a name everyone has and no one owns. He wasn't special until he was. 2 nights after he arrived, Yuri found a coin embedded in ice under his bunk. An old coin with a head I didn't recognize, ridged edge, almost perfect. He held up to the stove and the nurse smacked his hand away. "Don't show the ground your shine," she said. It made sense. We didn't show the ground our clean socks or our shared stories. But the coin wanted to be seen. I could feel that want. I had the sense of a breath held a long time and a smile that wasn't kindness. Yuri put the coin in his mouth and let it rest under his tongue like a communion. He slept with it that way. He didn't choke. In the morning, he wasn't dead. That's all it takes for a ritual to be born. Men started hiding things in their mouths at night. Teeth loosened. Some choked and lived and pretended they meant to. The boy stole his uncle's ring and sucked it until the uncle woke and beat him. Not because of the theft, but because of the invitation. Invite anything in your mouth where your breath lives and it knows you. That was the unspoken third rule. I ignored it because I wanted to feel protected by a thing I could hold. I had nothing gold. I had a button with shine still on it, an offcut from a uniform too big for me. I warmed it in my hand and then tucked it into my cheek like a secret. I felt safe for exactly as long as it takes to fall asleep. I dreamed the pit, not the first one, a different pit where the ground was soft, too soft, like bread after the knife. I dreamed I was stepping into it, and also that I was already at the bottom watching my own feet arrive. When I woke, I had bitten my tongue deep, and the blood was so warm in that cold that I wept. The button was gone. I spat and only got red. I felt along the floorboards. I patted my chest. I asked the man above me to move, and he groaned and told me to fuck myself. The button never turned up. That was the first thing the ground took from me that it had no use for. It doesn't eat metal. It doesn't eat cloth. It eats the exchange. The habit of believing relief is a thing you can lodge behind your teeth. We went through 3 foremen that winter, not because the ground took them, but because the guards rotated their cruelty like crops. By the time an officer learns your name, he likes to move to a new set of throats. The 3rd foreman was named Leonid, but everyone called him Lion, until we stopped because he hated it, and his hating it brought us brief joy. He had a limp from childhood fever and a trick of closing one eye when he measured distances. He was good with rope. He was bad at mercy. He kept a list of infractions and drew lines through names with a pencil he sharpened with his teeth. Leonid decided we'd build the barracks higher. "Snow will be heavy," he said, as if weight wasn't something we carried already. He made us lift the whole structure with jacks while the carpenters slid blocks under the posts. We lifted at night because the cold makes the wood less soft. 5 jacks, 5 crews. My jack slipped. It didn't fall. It slipped. The barack dropped a half-inch, and the sound it made, a wooden gasp, woke the boy and made him laugh, and the bell rang once from his bump, and in that sound Leon had heard evidence. He hit me across the mouth with his list. Paper doesn't hurt much, but his knuckles did. I thought, while he struck me, about how lists live longer than men. That was the thought I had. Not my mother, not bread, the immortality of columns and rows. That night, I took my shovel and walked out far enough that the barack light couldn't find me. This is the part you care about, the walking out alone, the idiot bravado. I needed to piss, and I needed to place my boot in a print that didn't belong to me. I needed to hear how quiet it could get. You don't understand quiet like that unless you've stood inside it. It's the quiet where you hear the bones inside your ears remember their function. I pissed into a drift, and the steam rose up and smelled like an animal. I decided to count 10 breaths with my eyes closed. At 5, my lashes iced together. At 7, I heard something soft as the back of a hand sliding along the underside of a table. At 9, it said my name. It didn't say it wrong. It said it exactly how my mother did when she thought I was asleep and wanted to keep me that way. I opened my eyes and saw nothing. That was almost worse. I crouched and put my glove on the snow, feeling the crust, and then the little compress before collapse. I whispered, no, I didn't know who I was talking to, only that the ground had angled itself toward me like a dog placing its head on my knee. I took a step back, and that step sank more than it should have. I lunged left and fell on my hip and let the pain tell me where up was. I crawled on my elbows because elbows think in emergencies and hands are idiot artists. I crawled until I hit the packed path and smelled piss and kitchen grease and knew I was home. In the morning, Yuri asked me, "You go out?" I said, "No." He said, "Good." Then he pulled a tin out from under his bunk and slid me a chipped cup of something brown. "Coffee," he said. He said it like a joke. I drank it because wanting is a kind of prayer too. It tasted like bark and something chemical we used to get paint off. It warmed me anyway. "You keep count," he said. "What do you count?" I said sacks. He laughed. "No, now." I said breaths. He nodded like I'd solved a secret. That winter made rumors the way warm kitchens make condensation on window panes. Men talked about the first camp, the one under ours, the one under that. Stacked wrong. Someone said the whole tundra is a layered cake of failed prisons, failed towns, failed farms that got eaten by snow and diggers and orders. Someone said we're the frosting. Someone said there were tunnels. Someone said there was a woman who walked between the barracks at night and touched foreheads and took the fever away, and then there was a hole where her footprints were. Someone said a guard married her, and they both sang together during a toast. Someone said dumb things to keep from saying the hard thing. The ground remembers. That was the hard thing. No one wants to be remembered by dirt. The first thaw came like a rumor too. In March, the snow lost its appetite and the days stretched by a handful of minutes, and the men began to imagine what they would do in spring. Same work, different mud, but still, we let the sun bribe us. The creek laughed loud again. The larches gave up their sighs for little green whispers. The nurse took a nap in a shaft of light with her mouth open and looked like a child with a bad dream. The radio got arrogant and told a story about a parade somewhere south. Sasha cleaned his bell and whistled through the missing tooth he'd earned breaking up a fight. Even the boy grew taller in 2 weeks, pants creeping north. Spring should have saved us. It didn't. It just rearranged the trouble. Thaw means water, and water means revealing. The pit we left west didn't open like a mouth. I know because a convoy came through, and the driver told us over cigarettes that there's nothing there now but a shallow bowl you can walk across without the snow taking you. He stomped his boot and said, "Stupid stories." And I imagined his boots sinking in the middle of his sentence and him not finishing even in his own head. Here, east, the water made a new place speak. Not a pit, a seam. Imagine a scar on the land that chooses to unzip. Not wide. Wide means warning. A seam can be stepped over without thinking. It showed up behind the tool shed while we were yelling about a missing spade. I blinked, and there was the snow slumped down into a narrow throat of blue that you didn't see until you were over it. I know because I almost stepped into it. I felt the air change by my knee. It was colder inside that seam than the air above it, a sneaky cold that wicks upward. I took a half step back and said a word I hadn't used since confession. The seam made a noise, a wet click like a tongue removing itself from the roof of a mouth. I did the wrong thing. I spoke into it. "Hello," I said. I kept it soft because it felt correct to be gentle. The seam clicked again. Then it breathed. I felt the faintest sponge of suction, the kind that pulls your shirt a little when you open a cellar door. "No names," I said out loud, to myself because that was a rule. The seam didn't need my name. It knew. It's a lousy storyteller's trick to say that anything new. I tell you this. Something under there was busy. Busy like bees building. Busy like men organized by lists they never see. Busy without heat. I did not tell anyone about the seam. That's another wrong thing. I told myself what we all tell ourselves, that to speak a danger is to give it an order. This is not true. To speak a danger is to distribute its weight. That night the seam came to the barack. Not physically. It sent its smell, that cellar ferment Underwood. Men woke and didn't move. The nurse coughed and folded it on herself like a paper thing in fire. Sasha sat up and touched the bell with 2 fingers, then pulled his hand back like it had bitten him. The radio found a frequency where children were reciting a poem about a flag, and for a long minute their voices braided with the breathing in the barack, and I felt a wrong joy, like the way the body sometimes bursts into laughter when it has no room for tears. "Dig with us," the air said without using the shape of any tone. It didn't feel like a command anymore. It felt like a solution to a math problem I'd been hunched over since before I could count. No one went outside. The thing under the thaw didn't insist. It waited. That was worse. It's easy to hate a thing that drags you. It's harder to argue with an answer that offers itself like a chair when your knees hurt. The next day, Leonid became useful. My mother used to say, every bad man has one good job inside him, like a kernel that refuses to rot. Leonid limped to the tool shed with Sasha and Yuri and me, and we found the seam again, widened now by a son that wanted gossip. Leonid paced alongside it and measured with his thumb knuckle and his breath, and whatever geometry he kept between his crossed eyes. "It travels," he said. He sounded awed the way children are awed by trains. "It moves when we aren't looking. I marked the snow here yesterday with my stick." He pointed to a line. The line ended 3 inches shy of where the seam side now. We looked at each other like suspects. "Fill it," Sasha said. He wanted any sentence to end that way. "Fill it and nail a board over it." "With what?" Yuri asked. "Spare earth?" Leonid shrugged. "Ice. Snow. Men." He didn't mean the last part, but the seam did. It whispered as if there were many throats stacked, wheezing, and they found a unison. "With us," the cold said. "With us." We brought snow in a wheelbarrow, and it hissed when we dumped it. Not steam, but a sound like steam, memory of kettle in a place that never boiled. The seam drank. The seam ate snow like a murdered man, pretending not to be hungry. The more we poured, the more it asked. Hours passed. The day slid sideways. My hands went from red to white to the pleasant fake pink, and the nurse slapped them back to hurt. "Keep paying," she said. "Pain is map." By dusk, the seam had narrowed. I stood above it and listened to the slow, slow slide of something long under there, like the sound in your attic you pretend is wind. Leonid said, "We wait," and we waited, and the seam held. It held through that night. It held until morning. Then it opened somewhere else, by the latrines. Someone squatted in the not quite morning, and the ground beneath him sighed, and his bare ass disappeared into the dark, and he screamed in a pitch that isn't man. We ran and found him shoulder deep, his collarbone turned into a fulcrum, arms windmilling, eyes rolling with a fear so hot I thought the frost on his lashes would boil. "Don't pull him," the nurse barked. She had a soldier's voice when she needed it. And we stopped, hands in the air, frozen in stupid rescue. "Sash," she snapped the board. "Now." We slid a plank under his armpits. He fought us because panic is usually an argument with physics. He twisted and the seam widened and took his left leg to mid-thigh like a parent lifting a child into a bath. It was careful. That is the worst thing I can tell you. It was careful. We tipped him sideways onto the plank, and the seam complained in a tone I recognized from the bell. It didn't like being cheated. It didn't let go of his boot. When his foot came up, it left the boot, and with it most of his little toe. He didn't know yet. He tried to hit the nurse, and she hit him first. "Breathe wrong," she told him. "Breathe wrong." He blinked. He matched his breath to nothing. The seam closed politely and waited for us to be done. After that, men walked funny for a week like the ground was following our feet, and we were trying to step sideways out of our own shadow. Sleeping went out of fashion. Work became rest because working meant your muscles distracted you from prayer. Letters to the dead changed tone. "I am good," Mikhail wrote. "I eat. I remember the smell of soap." He crossed out the last line 3 times, but the pencil marks just made a black streak that looked exactly like grief. He handed me the letter to proof for spelling because he wanted to feel like a student again. His wife's name was Anya. I think she was the type to correct him gently and then put bread in his pocket without telling. The boy learned to move noiselessly. It wasn't natural. He had a child's usual purpose in footfalls. He liked to be heard, but the seam taught him a new game, the kind where you pretend not to be there. He watched the bell. He watched Sasha's hands. He watched my mouth when I counted. I caught him watching, and he grinned and showed me a frog he'd stuck in his coat. "He's sleeping," he whispered. The frog wasn't sleeping. I wanted to tell him the truth, but the truth is a seam in a boy's life. Once you open it, it never closes. I said, "Put him back by water." He nodded and did, and the frog didn't hop. I could hear the creek laughing like we were the joke. Spring brought men from the city with clipboards, blue hats too clean, scarves the wind hadn't gotten its teeth into yet. They smelled like paper and soap. One of them tried to smoke without coughing and failed. They asked questions. How many men? How many meters of trench? How many bricks? Did we report the bones? Did we send the buttons west? "We always send the buttons west," the dispatcher said, exhausted by the permanent astonishment of bureaucracy. The men with clipboards didn't write that down. They wrote that the ground had differential settling and that our latrine protocol was insufficiently adaptive. They made diagrams. They asked if anyone had fallen through. We said no. We are not cowards, but we pick our battles. And the battle you pick in places like this is the one where you keep your mouth shut and let the paper eat the truth. The men with hats left. The seam sighed like a woman after a dance. Summer shortened the distance between each whisper. Heat made the smell sweeter. The frames of our brains expanded and set. Forest sap stuck your palms with memory. Mosquitoes learned your name and passed it to their children. I watched the seam like a man watches a clock he hates. It wandered. It drank meltwater and pissed mist. It flirted with the mess hall, and then with the barack, and then with the shed where he kept the rope. It followed conversations, and I learned to break my sentences with sudden coughs just to confuse it. The ground under the radio tent heaved one afternoon like a sleeper adjusting a blanket. The radio kept talking. An announcer told a joke about a dentist and a minister. We all laughed, hard and weird. Then we turned to see if the seam was amused. It wasn't. The ground is humorless. It doesn't need laughter. It likes the edges of it, though the panted breaths after the bent-over vulnerability, the exposure of the urging muscles at the throat. A man named Dennis, broad back, a scar like a question mark on his calf, decided to fix the seam with fire. He soaked rags in kerosene and lit them and tossed them in one by one, a worship of orange. The seam accepted the flames with the patience of a stove. The rags burned slow. The seam went from blue to darker blue. We stood around it like villagers watching a trial. The flame went out without smoke. Dennis spat. "Fuck you," he told the ground. "Get in line." That night, Dennis snored louder than usual, and then he didn't snore at all, and in the morning his bunk was flat and his shape was in a mattress, not sunk, but hollow like bread dented by a thumb, and the seam was under his bunk now, and his boots sat against the post like a man he'd sent away to wait for him out in the sun. The bell rang once. Nobody moved. The nurse said, "We are running out of ways to deny it." She said it like a joke, but there was iron in her voice, and she and the seam had a conversation across the threshold of silence that I could almost hear. I didn't sleep much that summer. I took a new habit. At night, when the men had turned their faces away from the stove and the boy had gone finally quiet and Sasha's bell had arranged itself into a stillness I didn't trust, I counted. Not sacks, not breaths, steps from my bunk to the door, to the shed, to the seam, and back. I never walked it, but I measured it in my head and the number changed. 52 steps became 54, became 56, and some nights it was 49, and that's when I knew the seam had found a shortcut we didn't deserve to know about. The ground was folding. Autumn comes fast in Siberia. The larches thought about it for one day, and then did it. Yellow like old teeth. The boys in blue hats didn't come back. The radio learned a new silence, the kind that has guilt in it, and then decided to forget again. The scene took a knife, not a real knife. It sharpened its edges. The ground near it turned brittle. Men stepping there heard a music like porcelain cracking in another room. The nurse forbade us from walking heavy. We tiptoed like thieves in our own barracks, like lovers reluctant to wake each other. The boy, of course, stomped when no one looked, and then learned to stomp without sound because childhood is adaptation at speed. That October, when the cold found our faces like a friend who never forgets your address, I heard the scrape under the ice again. It wasn't our old pit. It didn't have to be. The scrape is the scrape. It's the sound of metal teaching dirt a song. Work begot work. The seam sat by the mess door and let us step over it like a cat that has claimed a threshold. It liked us careful. It liked our eyes down. It liked how small the world got when your next footfall could be the last one. The ground talked louder then. The voices didn't bother with words much. They climbed into rhythm. They said with us, and they said it not as a request, not even an invitation. It was an arithmetic done against our will. I saw a man, Mikhail the teacher, stand in the mess with his tray of gray and blink a long blink and make a face like someone remembering a word. And then he didn't sit. He turned toward the door, and his tray tilted, and the slop ran like a question into his sleeve, and he didn't notice, and his mouth made my name in a way that begged me to be heavier than him. I grabbed his elbow and said, "Not that way." He said, "What way?" I pointed at the table. He sat. We breathed wrong together. He looked at me, and in his eyes I saw the pit I left west, and the seam under the shed, and the creek, and the boy's frost skull in the window glass, and my mother's unwhistling kettle. And I saw that he was 2 steps ahead of me on a staircase I couldn't admit I was climbing. "Dig with us," the seam said. Not to him, to me. It said it pleasant, like a clerk offering a receipt. I survived that winter. You know I did because I'm telling you this. That isn't bragging. It's an indictment I see when I shave, when the mirror fogs and I let the fog stay because the man behind it is too sharp. The ground doesn't take everyone at once because then it would be done. It likes a cycle. It likes October. It likes the way the first cold re-educates the breath and reminds the bones of their ache. It likes men who think in columns and rows and promises. It likes me. We moved again east in late November, not because of the seam officially because the soil was wrong and the trucks hated that road. We packed with the speed of men who've done it too often and not often enough to get good at it. The nurse put her hand flat on a wall post and said something in a language I didn't know. A goodbye, maybe? A threat. The boy cried because he had outgrown his coat, and his uncle didn't notice. Sasha took the bell and wound its rope around his forearm like a tourniquet. The radio operator flicked his switch and nothing flicked back. He shrugged, then kissed the console like a lover he wouldn't write. We left. The seam didn't. It's not a pet. You can't take it. That's been my whole point. We left it eating the melt, making its tiny noises, lining itself with our names. How do I get from there to here? If this were a story I would skip and you'd let me. But you asked for the grain of the thing, the handful of chaff that sticks to your wet palm. That move east was my last as a prisoner. We set up Camp 207 again, where the map said we should. We dug where they told us, shallower, then deeper, then shallower again when the frost surprised us by being a different shape this year. The work wore my back down to a question mark to match the scar on Dennis's calf. The nurse left in spring with a convoy of sick and didn't come back. The boy became a young man in 2 months like bread rising too fast. Sasha disappeared in a snow squall and 2 minutes later reappeared on the other side of the barack and said, "Fuck," in a reverent liturgical tone and never told us what happened in those 2 minutes. Men were released. Names were read. Mine was read. That's simple. Paper finally loved me. The dispatcher who said move said go. He didn't look at me. It was better that way. I walked out of 207 and the cold kept a hand on my shoulder for 2 miles like a brother. Then I crossed into a different kind of air and I cried because warmth is a violence too. The world outside of camp is a non-committal thing. It takes you back with the sly generosity of a landlord raising the rent. I found work counting flour sacks for a baker, which is exactly the joke you expect it to be. I married a woman who didn't believe in ghosts because she believed in stitching, a thing you can hold. We had a kitchen that boiled and a window that fogged and a bed that offered instead of demanded. I kept my mouth busy with ordinary problems, and I learned how to stand in a crowd without bracing. And then October came. You know the rest of that. The first October was a knock under my feet while I crossed the market square. It was small, not a whisper. A knock, like a person trying to get your attention politely at first, so they can feel good later about how the bloodshed wasn't their fault. The second October, I was in my shop alone, and the light shifted and a sheet of paper slid off the counter and settled without any breeze, and I heard a shovel bite ice in a room that wasn't there. The third October was when my wife said, "You look like you're listening for a thing I can't hear," and I lied and said, "I am thinking about prices." And she said, "You are a terrible liar," and we both laughed because love likes weak liars. That year, I woke from sleep with my hand in the air like I'd been about to signal someone in a place where signals matter. The fourth October was quiet, and I felt a joy I didn't deserve. The fifth, the radio hiccuped and said Archangelsk in a tone I recognized. I didn't go back those years. I carried the pit with me like a bruised rib. I learned to breathe around it. You can live inside a story and do your chores. You can hold a loaf with both hands and pretend it weighs more than guilt. I told myself those men under that ice were dead enough for both of us. Then I learned something I should have known. Death doesn't solve thirst. The voices grew patient because they had to, and the patience itself began to sound like an invitation to sit down. Somewhere between the 7th and 8th October, my wife died of something that doctors explained and I didn't hear. She went in spring, which felt like a joke the ground tells. It's so good at jokes. I took off my hat and bent far enough over her grave that the top of my spine cracked loud, and I thought for a second the ground had finally come to collect. It let me get up. I walked home alone and counted steps and didn't like the number. The day after, I ate pickled cucumbers for breakfast because she'd left them in the jar and they still tasted like her patience. The radio coughed and kept talking because radios don't mourn. In October that year, the light came in at such an angle that the dust meant scripture. There was a scrape under the floorboards that had no earthly business being there. I leaned down and pressed my cheek to the plank, and it was warm from the sun and cold from below, a perfect meeting of injuries. I heard my name. I heard others too. The way a choir is still a choir, even when you know one voice. They said nothing new. They didn't have to. The sentence didn't acquire new grammar. It became more true the more I lived. With us, they said. I try to be clever. I walked in November in slippers with thick soles. I didn't carry a shovel. I avoided the creek. I avoided the market because it had stones that remembered how to be streambed. I avoided words that rocked back and forth in the chest. I let days go unfelt. I practiced being unmarked by weather. A human can choose numbness. The ground cannot. It doesn't forgive. It doesn't retaliate either. It continues. That is its violence. And so, here we are, you and me, with this story's spine under my fingers and that pit west, that seam east, that October present like toothache. It's been decades. Time is a glue that doesn't stick to things like this. I'm older than I expected to be. My hands remember shovels, even when I pick up a spoon. I check my breath sometimes without meaning to, and if it falls into rhythm with something, in a grocery line while tying my boot, I stop and make a fake cough to break it. I still won't say my name to the wind after dark. Not even for you. I don't hang bells. I don't keep coins. I sleep with my mouth open and my tongue flat so nothing can hide under it, and my dreams have to climb in by the door like decent guests. But you want more than rules. You want the bell. You want the boy. You want the underlined eye. You want what happened to the nurse. You wanted to open a cellar that never closes and invite you down. Fine. After I left, after the move east, I learned in a letter that never reached me that the nurse made it to the city. She died there in a bed with sheets, and a young doctor told the others. She spoke nonsense at the end. In that nonsense were the rules. Breathe wrong. Keep pain. Show no shine. Step over yourself. The boy grew tall and learned to walk around pits as if he'd been born to it. And then the army took him, and I don't know what ground took him later, but I'm not naive about choices. Sasha probably kept the bell on his wrist and rang it on purpose when he felt like a god, and then one night heard it without touching it and learned the same lesson we all do, that tools are only tools until they aren't. Leonid, lion, died of something not the ground because spite is a kind of medicine. Yuri lived long enough to see a city street after too many winters and then slipped on a patch of ice in front of a bakery and bled inside just enough to make a doctor shrug. Mikhail wrote letters even after his release. They were addressed to the same grave every time. A clerk at the post office finally took pity and told him to stop. He wrote anyway. Paper lives longer than men. I'm boring you. I can feel it. You want a new pit. You want to return. There isn't a new pit. There's the old one and me wearing it like a scarf. October is here again. The ground outside my shed has a seam that wasn't there yesterday. It will move. It always does. I keep a shovel I swore I wouldn't keep. Steel has a memory of heat, and the way it dings when it touches frozen earth is the closest thing to an honest bell I've heard in years. I oiled the handle against the crack, and the oil smelled like summer, which is cheating. I went to the cemetery today to tell my wife that I am leaving. I said it out loud because ghosts like honesty. Then I stood and nearly said my name into the wind and didn't, and I laughed a little because I am not brave in the ways that win medals, but I am brave in the ways that let you keep your breath out of sync. On the way home, a truck backfired and I flinched with my whole body, and a man watching said, "War?" And I said, "Yes." And he nodded as if that made us kin. He doesn't need to know that my war is with dirt. If I listen now, if I stop talking to you and let the world inside the boards come up, I can hear the breath of it. The soft suction that means my house is becoming a threshold. The cellar door is open in a room that doesn't have one. The voices aren't cruel. They never have been. That's part of the design. Cruelty alarms men. Kindness drags them twice as far. I'm telling you this so that when I go, I have a witness. So that when you hear a shovel in your floor one day in whatever country thinks it owns you, you will know not to count. Or you will know to count wrong. You will know to hum off-tempo and to put your coins away and to walk around the damn places like they have your name in them. And if you go anyway, and some of you will, because patient voices make us honest, you will know who is waiting. They aren't strangers. They are men who worked beside me and did what Liz told them and learned what weather does to lungs. They're a teacher who writes to a wife, and a cook who burns his hands, and a boy who animated a broken truck because he could, and a nurse who could hit like a soldier. They're a guard who touched a bell and disliked who he was, and a foreman who hated a nickname and loved his ropes. They're a ground that learned to talk because so much listening taught it how. They're the seam under your feet. They're the pit under our camp. They are me soon enough. I have packed nothing. There's nothing to pack. The shovel is by the door, and I tied a rag around the handle where the splinter raises because skin remembers hurts and repeats them with enthusiasm. My coat is the same one I wore the last year inside. It still smells faintly of smoke and rat shit because no amount of weather takes that out. I will walk east. I know where to go. East is a habit, and the ground I owe lives on the way. I will take the road until it becomes a path, and the path until it becomes a choice, and the choice until it becomes a seam. I will step careful the whole time because that is what I am. I will not say my name. I will breathe wrong. I will arrive in October because that is the month the ground understands. When I get there, I will listen for the scrape. I will hear it. I already do. I will stand by the edge until they speak, and they will speak the sentence they speak. They will say, "With us," and I will say yes. Not with happiness, but with the relief of arithmetic completing itself. I will go down. Maybe you'll say I should fight. Maybe you'll say you owe yourself something different. Maybe you will be right in a different story. In this one, the only way out is down. I'll leave this on the table. I'll lock nothing. I will step out, and the bell I don't have will ring, and I will walk past where the water forgets it is river and becomes ice, and the air will feel like a hand on my cheek that isn't unkind. I will go to Camp 207, or what that name now means, and I will pick up the shovel I left inside myself. And I won't stop. I left before sunrise, so the city wouldn't look me in the eyes. The streets were crusted with an early frost that hadn't decided whether to commit. My boots found the ruts the delivery trucks made and followed them until the ruts forgot how to be roads. I didn't bring food. Hunger makes the mouth count. I didn't bring matches. Fire makes you talk. I walked with my hands in my pockets, so I wouldn't be tempted to clap them because rhythm invites. I kept my breath clumsy and wrong, letting it snag on a ragged edge in my throat, and the cold took that as a courtesy. The first day belonged to fences. They went by with their broken slats like old men missing teeth. Dogs watched from behind them with eyes that didn't waste anger. A woman hosing down her step glanced at me, and the hose fanned silver through the light and looked warmer than it was. Two boys argued over a wheel that no longer belonged to anything. The argument had no winner, so it was an honest argument. I moved past all of it like I was a sickness traveling without a carrier. Outside the last houses, brush leaned on itself against the wind. Birch trunks kept their bark clean like they thought it would save them. The ground was the color of answers. I cut across a fallow field to save time I didn't need to save, and stumbled when I found the first patch of old root work under the new grass. The tech of trees from 30 years ago remains even when you remove the visible part. I knelt and touched it with the flat of my hand, and the old wood answered me with a coolness that was not unfriendly. I said nothing to it because wood has ears but not patience. My mouth tasted like old coins even though I kept it empty. I wiped the taste on my sleeve as if that could matter. Around noon, a truck passed headed the other way, east to west, and the driver slowed because men slow when they see a man on foot going where the weather thinks it lives. He leaned out the window and yelled, "Where are you going?" like a god testing a story. I answered with a hand that meant, "I'm fine," and he made a face like men make when they stop themselves from kindness in case it costs too much, and he drove on. I breathed wrong and listened until the motor noise got folded into the wind. If you're waiting for the forest to get haunted, you don't know forests. Trees don't need ghosts. They work for themselves. The haunted part is in you, the way you start measuring distances and names. That birch is the nurse's knuckle. That larch is Mikhail's pencil straw. That smear of water is the boy's breath circle on the mess hall door. That shadow is the underlined I when he didn't like what he learned about himself too late. Every step east, the world recruited into the old camp with the laziness of a story that refuses to be retired. By dusk, I saw the hill where a radio tent might be, and my legs remembered how to stop themselves with a stupidity they had unlearned in town. I slept under a windfall with my face in my arm and my body arranged like a sentence I didn't dare conjugate. Second day, the creek. It didn't laugh exactly, it showed me teeth. Ice lined its edges like someone had stitched glass into the water's mouth. I knelt and drank anyway. The shock of cold made me cough and cuss, and I kept my breath crooked because coughing can accidentally become a metronome if you let it. A beaver had a house there or something like it, would pile with an optimism that made me want to pat it. I didn't. Offer no shine. Show no intent. I set a rock on another rock because men need to stack, and then I knocked it over because men need to ruin too. The road, when it found me, was narrower than memory and full of the kinds of holes you only notice when you're already stepping into them. I followed it with the ease of a mistake I'd rehearsed. I passed a mile marker bent in the middle as if someone had tried to fold it into a smaller truth. The number on it was burned away by who knows who, as if someone thought erasing the digits would confuse miles into being new. It didn't. Distances make their own decisions. I felt the first whisper at a culvert where a trickle ran under the road and brought old leaves through like smugglers. I stood above it, and it breathed up at me with the confidence of an invitation you can't refuse because you mailed it to yourself years ago. Not yet. I told it because I don't believe in being dramatic for free, and it accepted that without taking offense. By evening, clouds gathered as if they had business. I walked faster because something in me had learned to expect a timing. I would arrive at twilight to the place that taught me twilight, and the light would do that thing it does, thin, then thicken, then choose to stop being a participant. The camp would not be there, not the way it was. You can't hold a shape like that against the winter. Boards warp, rope rots. Men who leave take certain angles with them and never manage to forget, but the wood does. Still, places remember. They remember with depressions, with the way snow drifts, with the way sound travels a little longer in one direction than another. I counted without numbers, and my feet found the turn they used to find in the dark. It disgusted me how easy it was. There it was. Not the camp, the negative of it. The ground sat with an attitude. The wind slowed to listen. The footprints in the new frost weren't there because I was the first one foolish enough to come this week. But the frost had settled in the old paths like an animal curling into a familiar bedding, and you could read our history in where it lay thicker. Mess here, latrines there. The post I'd hit with the jack when Leon had made us lift the barack. Its ghost stood at attention, a suggestion in the tilt of grass. I stood at the edge and heard my teeth creak. That subtle pressure they get when the cold climbs your spine and tries to rewrite your bite. I expected the seam. It was not the seam. It was the pit. It had found a lesson we thought we had buried under an extra winter. It hadn't gotten bigger. That's the courtesy. It's at the same width in the earth, the same inadequate mouth. What had changed was the lid. There was a lid now, not a board, not a proper grate. Something Frost had decided to learn. It had woven across the opening a mesh so thin it looked like breath made visible. I knelt and wiped a glove across it, and it broke without shattering, the way skin parts after a long scab. The cold rose and held my face like a god too fond of me. I want to put my hands in. That's an ugly truth. It wasn't curiosity. It was relief. Think of the way aching legs lean toward a chair that isn't yours. Not yet, I said. I had that much sovereignty. I tested the edge with the shovel I'd carried like a promise the whole way. Metal spoke to ice like two old men complaining. Short words, heavy history. The sound it made went down instead of up. Echoes should climb. This one wanted roots. Something moved under the mesh with the laziness of a sleeper not ready to rise. I crouched. I tried to hear individuals in the choir and can still swear I did. The cook with his burned hands. The teacher with his imaginary pencil. The boy with his ring of frost on the window and the frog cupped in his coat. The nurse, in the place beneath all places, throwing a word like a stone. I chose not to say any names. Mine glowed like a hot nail in my mouth anyway. You want terror. You want clarity. You want the part where I do the wrong thing on purpose. Before that, I argued. I stood up in the raw wind, and I argued the way a man argues with a judge in a language the judge pretends not to fully understand. I made it out, I said. I put years between us. I planted myself far away. I learned to breathe wrong as prayer. I kept your rules. And now you call me here like a fisherman who knows what bait I like? No. I said this with no witnesses except snow and a couple of crows on a line who cocked their heads like critics. The pit listened the way ground listens, this stillness that's also a grin. Footsteps behind me. I turned like a thief. A man was there at the tree line wearing a hat with the wrong brim, a crumpled thing you'd give a dispatcher as an insult. His coat hung on him like a decision he hadn't fully committed to. He was younger than me and older than my memory. The wind loved him. I hated him on sight, which is how I knew who he was supposed to be. You made it back, he said. If you've ever had a tooth pulled without enough numb, you know that feeling, the tug, all the way down your arm? His voice did that to my back. You should be dead, I said. It wasn't bravado. It was a formality. The dead are honest about schedules, he said, looking past me at the mesh. We are only strict when we have to be. I didn't ask his name because names make math, and I'm bad at sums I didn't choose. He smiled, but not with his mouth. You don't have to put on a show for me, he said. You know why you came. I came to say goodbye. I lied, and he laughed so suddenly a blackbird in the tree startled and swung once on the branch. This is the only right place to say hello, he said. He walked to the edge and balanced his toe on ice with a gentleness that made my knuckles ache. The mesh flexed and didn't give. The sound that came up wasn't a whisper, not exactly. Not words. Picture snow inside a throat. Picture frost curating vowels. We keep good time, the breath said because it had learned to translate. I told him to get away from the edge. He tilted his head like a dog. You're worried about me, he said. You're late. For what? Your turn. I hated him for making that sound like charity. You were the one who wrote our names down, I said. You said move. You said go. Why aren't you rotting with the rest? He shrugged. The coat moved like a rug thrown over a question. Everyone does their job, he said. And when he said everyone, I heard the nurse's hands, the radio's bees, Sasha's bell, the boy winding his little truck around cup handles like a road. Paper has to walk some of us to the door. You're not real, I said, and he waved that away. It's a small trick, dismissing reality with a shrug, and I envied how easy it looked. A shadow slid under the mesh, wide and blunt like a shoulder. I went to a knee again without deciding to. The cold held my head like a mother with a feverish child. The voices had patience in them now, like an instrument with no strings uses silence. I rested the shovel across my thighs and felt the handle's grain telling me places it had splintered and I had smoothed. The dispatcher, or the idea of him, watched me with a boredom he faked badly. He was excited. The dead get excited like insects do. All at once, with a lot of legs. Do I go down? I asked the mesh. Or do you come up? It answered me by staying polite. The edge didn't crack. The seam didn't broadcast its new address. It waited to be obeyed. I walked around the edge. My boots made that squeak they make in cold, so deep it thinks it's summer. I looked for a ladder I knew wasn't there. A gentler slope. A compromise. The ground isn't a negotiator. It likes its terms cruelly simple and small. A mouth, a word, a yes. You could have me fall through a ceiling in a bakery. I told it. You could have me die in a bed midwinter while my breath counts itself and forgets a number. You could have me step off a curb and learn asphalt's opinion. Why this? The old pit, like a good listener, did not push. The old men I carry, Mikhail with his letters, the cook with his kettle, Sergei with the toe missing from the latrine incident, the soldier who married the woman who walked between the barracks at night, Sasha with the bell string mark on his wrist, stood under that mesh and held their silence like a bowl. The nurse was in there too, I know it. There is no mass that's strong without a metal thread through it. The dispatcher sat on a stump like a child, told to wait outside the store and behave for once. You won't be alone, he said, and I thought of the stupidest comfort in the world. At least we go together. He must have read that on me because he shook his head and snorted. That's not why you came, he said. Say it. He wanted the confession. Men like him always did. I stared into the mesh at my almost reflection because the ice held just enough light to make a suggestion of a face. My face is a paragraph I don't read out loud anymore. I said, I'm tired of not being done, and the mesh whispered the sound it makes when frost relaxes under a new sun. That was yes. Even a no over ice sounds like yes if you want it enough. Do you remember the rules? The dispatcher asked, and I nodded. The rule not to speak your name after dark. The rule to breathe off tempo. The rule not to hide things in your mouth. The rule never to show shine. The rule not to count in neat columns when the ground is listening because columns are roads. He leaned forward. They don't matter now, he said. You can stop guarding yourself on the way to the knife. I know, I said. I did. It still felt wrong to lay them down. The rules had kept me alive and also kept me more near the grave than anyone needed to be. I pressed the shovel blade to the mesh and put weight on it. The ice sagged and made a sound like a bell, but not Sasha's bell, not that cheap little bronze jingle. Something deeper, a cathedral someone buried upside down. The dispatcher stood and stepped back like a cat. I adjusted my hand. I'll let the blade bite a little. The mesh parted as if it had always been a door waiting for the right hand to knock the correct way. Down wasn't a drop, it was a slope. That was yet another courtesy. The dead are such hosts when they want to be. I put my foot into the space with the care of a person getting into a bath too hot for them. Cold took my ankle and wrote a sentence around the bone. I lifted my next foot and the world tilted. I didn't look at the dispatcher again. If he was still there, good. If he wasn't, better. A man should go to his grave as much alone as he's able. It keeps the accounting tidy. One step. The sound my boot made wasn't crunch. It was a hush, a small pillow noise. Another step. A pressure against my shins like a polite dog. The ice around my calves hummed. Actually hummed. My teeth picked up the vibration and wanted to play along. I dragged my breath so it wouldn't find a rhythm by accident. The mesh widened under me. I kept the shovel without needing to. Old habits accompany suicides to demonstrate how useless they always were. Inside the pit wasn't dark like a closed eye. It was dark like ink you could swim in if you accepted the idea of lungs that had never learned air. I saw shapes. I saw the slope continuing. I saw, ridiculously, a nail hammered into old frozen ground and bent sideways as if someone had tried to hang a picture in the underworld. I reached for it, and the ice said no the way a mother says no in public. I left the nail alone. I turned my head to listen. Not dig with us this time. Something else. Count for us, they said. The weight of that hit me behind the knee. I actually sat, right there on the frozen incline, and the cold soaked my ass through like someone pushing the heel of their palm into a bruise. Count for us. Of course. Of course the ground would want me to do what I'd always done. Only more honestly, only forever. I laughed once, a stupid dry thing. The sound went nowhere. The pit keeps the good sounds. I slid a little farther. The mesh above me reformed without crowding. I wasn't trapped. I was held. The distinction matters only to people who plan to leave. I plan to leave eventually. You can judge me for that if it helps you. But for now, I surrendered to the tilt. I smelled the old smell, the cellar with fruit, the second life of rot. I smelled metal kept in mouths too long. I smelled kerosene, not to burn, but to remember the idea of burning. Ismeerliedmen. Their faces came, not as visions. Don't get romantic on me. Faces happen because light is rude and insists on making shapes, even when shapes aren't called for. I saw eyebrows. I saw the black crack of mouth. I saw a cheek with a dent from a fist that had loved too bluntly. Close. Above me, not above me. On every side, the suggestion of suit jackets turned into captor clothes, turned into the coats we're all buried in regardless of uniform. The nearest breath touched my cheek. It was the nurse. I knew because I felt the callus on the back of her knuckle where she pressed a vein. I put my forehead to the ice that wasn't ice and said thank you and meant it. She answered by inhaling slow enough to pull tears out of my eyes without letting them fall. We moved. That's the part that we'll never describe right. The pit moved me without moving. The slope became a hallway, and the hallway became a seam, and the seam became my house's floor from a month ago, and the market stones from the year my wife died, and the culvert from this morning, and the mess hall from then, and at each shape men stood in their best quiet and asked nothing and took everything. It didn't hurt. It was work. Hard work does its own asking. I hooked my shovel under something that wanted moving, and I moved it. The shovel told me when it hit rock, I would have once called bone, and bone, I would have once called rock. The shovel vibrated against the old ridges of handcuff chain. The shovel remembered the bell, and the bell rang once in the part of me that used to be tender and was not anymore. We dug, not down, through. That's the whole trick. The ground doesn't crave depth. It craves companionship in every direction. It craves a network of acceptance. It wants a web of us hissing agreement. It wants the city under your city so that when you cough, your neighbor answers from the cellar. It wants lanes. I obliged. I told myself I was helping so that I wouldn't have to remind myself I was joining. I counted because they had asked it, and when I got to 30, I did not start over. I went to 31. The men around me sighed, and the sound was forgiveness and ask and ledger and page turn. I don't know how long I worked. Yes, I do. October. It was always October. Time fed me the same minute and let me chew it to tastelessness. I lost touch with my legs and then got them back. I bit my tongue and swallowed blood out of habit, and the ground thrummed at that like applause. I kept the shovel. The handle rubbed a raw place under my thumb like a ring you won't admit is too tight. We widened a corridor and it opened into a room that had never been a room except in the muscle memory of a barack. There, the boy had arranged tin cups in a circle like men's hats. He looked at me through ice like a pond looks at you when it's decided you're harmless, and he nodded. He was not small anymore. He was also very small. Both are true. I understood that he had been here longer than anyone and that this had made him not a king, but a lever. He took the shovel out of my hands without touching it. He placed it somewhere that wasn't a corner. He pointed with his chin toward the deeper blue. I went because I am obedient to boys I've been unfair to. The next space had a sudden warmth to it. Warmth that belonged to breath and the memory of breath. There, stacked like forms on a desk, were the names. Not ink on paper. Not the words. The actual names. The way you hear them sung. The way a mother shapes hers when the world is too quiet. The way a nurse says it to pull you back from the edge without making you hate her for it. It all sat there like knives that refuse to stop being spoons no matter how hard you will it. Don't, I said, and the chamber laughed. The sound rolled down and back like a tide with opinions. I knelt at the pile of names, and I searched mine out of reflex like a man looking for his hat in a cathedral. Of course, it was right there, facing outward because shame keeps ordering the world for you even when you move to a different one. I put my hand on it. It pricked and warmed and pricked again. I told the truth I hadn't told in any city. I counted wrong once, I said. I let be the wrong thing. I liked how wrong felt because wrong is simple. Right is messy. Right bleeds. Wrong is paperwork. The pile side. I hate when a place gets smug. I wasn't giving it that. I'm not sorry, I said, and then I amended. I'm sorry for the way sorry never fully covered it. That pleased the names. They gave me a tiny room to stand in. Someone came in who I had not asked for. Sasha, bell draped across his shoulders like a collar. His underlined, I was still underlined. He looked embarrassed. Good. I thought I was the worst of us, he said in that Barker Clore tone he always used that suggested the end of the sentence would be a price. Turns out I was just punctual. You kept the bell, I said. I kept the bell, he agreed. It stopped being a joke. I hate when jokes stop midday. What now? I asked. Do we toll it? Do we summon the last men? He shook his head. No more summoning. No more rules. He gestured at the corridor behind me. We keep doing what we are corridors. We prepare. The thaw, the freeze. The after and the after of that. The counting. Your job is the counting. Count what? Rooms. I laughed because humor is a scab you find yourself scratching when the wound underneath feels too naked. Rooms, I said. Good. I always wanted rooms. We worked. If your mouth is dry, I'm doing it right. This should feel endless, and it should also feel urgent. The ground showed me its architecture. It wasn't a mine. Mines go after metals. This was a bureaucracy. This was a file system. This was heroism turned into shelving. Men I knew by their breaths, particular damage peeled off and taught me small motions. How to break the frost without letting the fracture propagate toward anyone with new bones. How to lean on a shovel blade without making a song. How to listen to the creek even when the creek is in another country. How to step so that your weight tells the ground you are willing to stay without telling it you deserve to. Times I was hungry. The hunger didn't come with teeth. It came like a dull, cold love from afar. Times I was thirsty. The thirst tasted like the first winter's soup. Times I needed to piss and did and felt the seam find the heat and be glad. Times the names rose up in my mouth, unbidden, and I kept them there, whole and ugly, until they dissolved. Times I set my name down here because fuck it. Fuck ceremony. I said it and nothing terrible happened, and I laughed at myself until it turned into a noise people make when they're tired and don't want to scare children. Above us, things continued. I could feel trucks cross, thin little tremors like someone rolling marbles above a ceiling. I could feel a fox living where the latrine had been and teaching her kits to be brave around smells that promise salt. I could feel a man sweeping snow off a sign that had no meaning left except movement. I could feel October step aside for November with its sallow light, and then December arrive drunk and honest. I could feel years gather like birds on a wire and take off and come back and take off again. Once there was a knocking, very faint from the surface. Not like the knock I'd heard in the city. This was a little panic knuckle. Someone was above the mesh. Someone who had been told no and did not accept no from a place. We all stilled. Even the boys stopped being both ages and settled on the smaller one. The knock came again. It had a percussive hop of hope in it. I slid toward the shaft. Sasha shrugged the bell around to the front. The nurse's breath on my cheek advised a stillness. The mesh thinned at the top like a cloud that had thought better of being thick. A hand came through, not white like ice, pink, alive the way a lip is. Fingers spread and pressed the mesh, and the skin puckered where the cold drank it. "Help," someone said in the grammar of a new century. Not our tongues, not our war. It doesn't matter. Help is help. We all recognize it when it bleeds out of the throat unprepared. I reached, and the nurse slapped my wrist. Not hard, not to punish, to bring me back. What would we be helping him to? Her breath told me. She was right. There are rescues that are just elaborate kidnappings. We listened. The hand withdrew. We felt footsteps running backward. We felt the apology hang above us like smoke, then be pulled apart by wind. The mesh thickened again. The boys in this century will be fine until they aren't. That is the kindest way I can say it. I don't want to make a grand speech here. I know what I am to you. The guy who went back, the idiot, the truest one, the coward, the brave one, the clerk who discovered God and called it dirt. I am all of those depending on who you had to be to survive listening to me. What matters is that I am where I belong, and the winter agrees. The ground likes when statements line up like that. It purrs. Maybe you need an ending. People always do. We pretend we want truth, and then we complain when truth doesn't sit in the chair we pulled out for it. I will give you the ending I can give. There is the mesh. There is October. There's my shovel old, a part of my body now. There is the boss who learned to shut up inside the cold. There is the boy who is our emperor and our child and our little brother playing with cups. There is the nurse's knuckle. There is the corridor of names where each shape is a weight and each weight is a reminder. There is the smell of fruit trying again to be wine. There is the creek we will reroute under the mess hall, under your house, under your church, under your office where you count money that isn't bread, under your bed where your breath learns to behave, under your window where frost draws skulls that will be wiped by someone you love without thinking. If you ever come, and some of you will, because the world has never been good at keeping its feet, you will find the mesh very polite and the voices very patient and my breath somewhere in the mix. You won't hear me at first because you will be listening to yourself. Then you will hear me because we will have gotten the room built, and sound takes rooms to stand up in. We will make space. You will find your place on the slope. You will feel the cold say your name in a way that isn't cruel. You will put your hands to work, and you'll have the exact same thought I had. Oh, thank God, the arithmetic is over. You asked for rough. Here, my hands are torn where the wood keeps finding old cuts and making them relevant. My nose leaks. My eye sticks when I blink for too long. I fart, and it turns into a little cloud that confuses the ice, and the ice forgives me. I think about sex, and it becomes the same as digging, and I am more ashamed of that than of anything I did on paper. I think about bread, and it becomes the same as a bell. I think about my wife, and I hate that she is safer than I am, because safety always feels like distance, and I would like her clean palms to be dirty with this good work. I think about you, and I'm angry you asked me to tell this, and happy too, because telling is a warmth we won't have again, and I'm stealing it at the last second. The light above changes sometimes. That will be you, your headlights. your cigarette, your little filament bulb in a chicken coop, your phone, if that's the thing you kept and put your fear inside. We watch it and we feel its heat like a joke, a good one, the kind that makes all the men look at each other and remember that shoulders were invented so you could share burdens without asking. We go back to work when the light passes. We don't stop because the world's weather is someone else's problem now, and the world will come to us anyway. Everything does if you hold still enough. Count for us. The ground keeps saying, and I say yes, and maybe that is the happiest word I have ever owned. The other word I have is this, and I'm giving it to you. If you have to go, go in October. The ground loves an honest man. If you're not honest, it will teach you that part first. If you breathe in time with your walk, break it. If you sing, sing wrong. If you pray, keep it short. If you must bring something for your mouth to hold, make it a breath that won't learn a beat. Don't ring bells you don't want answered. Don't promise anything without planning to keep it underground forever. And if you hear your name where there is no one, accept the economy of that. I'm getting stupidly sentimental. The boy rolls his cups and gives me a look that says I'm embarrassing him, which is funny given what he's been through. Sasha taps the bell once, a sound that finds every cavity and says it knows the way. The nurse pushes her breath against my temple, and the pain there convulses and returns to a flatter line. The dispatcher, if he was even there, leans on a stump that isn't there and writes nothing on paper that doesn't exist because even down here he can't help himself. Yuri's coin rattles in a pocket it never left and announces that it never mattered and is permanent anyway. Leonid limps through and, this time, doesn't correct anyone about his nickname because nicknames are dead men's furniture. Mikhail writes to a wife and hands a letter into the pile where names sit, and the pile swallows it, and there's a hole that looks exactly like a healed wound. I take my shovel up and down, and the mesh hums, and my chest answers, and above, somewhere a fox shows her kids how to put one paw down, and then the other, and then wait, and one of them copies the paws, so perfect you'd swear he learned it from a man. We are almost finished with this corridor. That means we are only beginning the other. That is the whole joke. That's why the cold laughed when I said goodbye at my wife's grave. I thought end. It meant continuation. My hands will do this until they don't, and then my hands will do this. It is all the same eventually. That doesn't have to be a horror. It could be the opposite. The terror is fighting it while also knowing you won't win. The relief is putting the blade in exactly where it belongs. I am tired. That's not new and not a complaint. It's a description like saying, the wind is from the east, or the soup is gray, or the bell rings once when the man with the underline on his eye makes a mistake. I will lay myself against the slope after this next push, and I will let the names sort me. They will. They're practiced. They'll set me on a shelf and write a notch where I sit. They won't write me in ink. They'll do it with breath. Breath lasts longer. You don't need me anymore. You never did. Stories only ever scoop across the top of your fear and show you your own reflection, and if they're generous, they change the angle, so you look braver. I'm not here to make you brave. I'm here to make you honest. We owed the ground this much. It learned our names because we said them into the wrong air. It learned how to count because I didn't stop at 30, and because I kept sheets no one asked me to, and because I love columns and hated mess. It learned our humor because we laughed when radio voices told us about parades and dentists. It learned patience from October. It learned what a bell means, which is everything. I'm going, not away, farther in. I can feel the pressure change like someone opening a door into a warm kitchen. My mouth floods. I do not say my name. I do not say my name. It doesn't matter anymore. The shovel fits in my hand, and my hand fits in the cold, and the cold fits in the purpose, and the purpose fits in the notch on the shelf where I will be filed. It's all very neat for a mess. Thank you for walking me this far and listening. That's as much escort as any man needs. I will leave you now. If you need me 1 October, go to the ground. Not any ground. The ground you've taught by mistake. It will be waiting with its polite mesh and its corridor and its secret humor. It will be ready to take the breath you have borrowed all this time and make something useful out of it.